Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Delighted that you could join us for this final roundtable in SRTI's webinar series looking at using transparency to drive progress on responsible ship recycling, an incredibly important part of the drive towards more sustainable ship recycling. My name's Frances House. I am the Deputy Chief Executive with the Institute for Human Rights and Business, and I'm delighted to be working with SRTI in discussions around these issues. From our own perspective at IHRB, we have been developing a ship life cycle framework on risk and responsibility from a human rights perspective, from cradle to grave. And so this conversation around data and transparency driving progress in the industry is of enormous importance to the work that we're doing alongside the work that you guys are doing. We've got about 70 people joining this conversation. Some will be joining us as we go, with a fantastic representation across all the key stakeholders. And I was just reflecting with Andrew and Elizabeth earlier, the numbers for attending this webinar series have grown along the way, which I think is testament to how seriously stakeholders across the gamut are taking this issue of disclosure and transparency. So really, really pleased that you could join us. We've got ship owners, ship recycling facilities, cargo owners, P&I, finance, NGOs, international, intergovernmental organizations, and so on. So I hope that as we go and as the panelists conversation gets underway, questions that you can put in the Q&A box will sort of reflect the diversity of perspectives that we've got represented in the room, as it were. The event is being recorded, and the chat function is disabled, but the Q&A box is open and ready for you to be posting sort of as and when.
You're on mute there, Frances.
Sorry, first glitch. I hope that's the last one. I'm just going to move from giving a very sort of quick framing for those of you who may not have been on the first three webinars, which were looking at data and transparency, circular economy, and the role of financial stakeholders. And then hand to Andrew Strevens from SRTI to just give information on the updated ship owner disclosure criteria that has culminated from the discussions of the webinars so far. So looking for the validation of that updated ship owner disclosure. We'll then dive into the discussion with our panelists. I'll introduce them at that point. And take the discussion from there. But I would encourage everybody, this is an opportunity for, for robust discussion and sort of digging into the issues. So please sort of feel free to be sort of, honing in on particular details you want to have clarification on. Again, with the diversity of people listening in, there will be those of you for whom this is absolutely well known in great detail, others less so. So, by way of sort of very quick framing for the conversation, we all understand how hazardous the industry of ship recycling is and the complexity of that industry, the environmental, the social, the human rights risks, the commercial, reputational risks, and so on, all of that occurring within an absence of global regulation. the Hong Kong Convention not yet in force, the EU regulations, the carrots and the sticks there, but obviously that's not yet global regulation. Practices of flagging out continue, of course, and the role of cash buyers in all of this is a complex one. But if we're looking here in this conversation at the drive for more sustainable and a more responsible ship recycling industry, then what are those push factors that we're seeing? It's a combination of that drive towards a more circular economy that's gaining momentum, the need and the demand for far greater transparency coming out through increasing legislative requirements, the drive for mandatory human rights due diligence, climate risk reporting, and so on. And a lot of that is underpinned by the gaining momentum of ESG, environmental, social, and governance due diligence required by responsible banks and investors, and increasingly by cargo owners, by civil society organizations. Again, a wide pool of stakeholders who are really pushing the ESG dimension. Some of you will no doubt be familiar with Kate Raworth's donut economics model, where she talks about the environmental ceiling and the social floor, and that sustainable business can only operate within those boundaries. So I think that's very important, that we need to be bearing that in mind as we have this conversation. So SRTI's role in driving for more disclosure and transparency, absolutely critical. So I'm going to turn now to Andrew to update us on where we are with the updated disclosure criteria. Thanks, Andrew.
Great, thank you, Frances. So good morning, everybody. And as Frances mentioned, it's great to see you here this morning or this evening or this afternoon, your time. I'm just going to cover briefly a little bit about the SRTI's journey and something around the work that's been carried out post the webinars on the updated ship owner disclosure and where we stand. So this is who we are. We're an independent initiative. We're neither a standard nor a rating. We're made up of like-minded and leading organizations in the industry who are driving change for the better. Not only looking to do no harm, but very much to do good, to do the right things right. We're very pleased with the increasing number of signatories. We are now 11 ship owners, in total 26 signatories, and recent signatories being Altera Infrastructure, Evergreen Marine, and Gard. And this is a collective that's really leading the way and acting in the absence of a global regulation for safe and responsible ship recycling, which is our vision. Our main objectives are to improve transparency, increase disclosure and accountability in the industry, and help create a level playing field. We're also pleased that earlier this year we were fortunate enough to gain funding from the Engineering X program from Royal Academy of Engineering and Lloyd's Register Foundation, which is helping us further develop the initiative and reach the goals that we have set for ourselves. Next slide, please. Yeah, the webinar series, as Frances mentioned, we're very pleased. Many of you have participated all the way through, or some of the webinars. Across the three, we had a total attendee number of 106. Around 68 were unique participants carrying through those three webinars. And as Frances mentioned, we're touching around 70 today. We're very pleased, both with not just your participation, but the contributions made through the dialogue and the follow-up discussions afterwards. We very much sought out what additional data should be disclosed and tested these needs that were being expressed against the following three aspects. What is the data that's needed? Why is it useful? And who is it useful for? If it's not useful, then there's no point in collecting data, and it has to be useful for furthering the responsible and safe recycling and those stakeholders that use that data. In terms of the current ship owner disclosure, these are the 6 areas of the current disclosure as sent out in the pre-read, which hopefully you have been through earlier or in preparation for this discussion. And the first 3 webinars were designed to draw out some inputs for our further consideration to expand the ship owner disclosure, but also to consider what other data beyond the ship owner disclosure would need to be built in the further development of the SRTI. In particular, discussions around the rest of the life cycle and those who are involved in that process, in particular the ship recycling facilities themselves. So if we take a look at the additional elements that we have taken into consideration in the updating process, which is subject to finalization together with our steering committee. The first set here, or the first set of bullets, relates to what international conventions and principles does the policy that is being shared and disclosed by ship owners adhere to. So the additions here, although EU ship recycling regulation was covered, we are going to cover that more explicitly in the updated disclosure. In addition, the safety and health in shape breaking guidelines for Asian countries in Turkey 2004 will be added to the list of policy checks, and the newly introduced or recently introduced Ship Recycling Act in India 2019. In addition, we've expanded the disclosure to include, does the company include ship recycling information in its sustainability reporting, and also ask if this is verified by any third party and if there is a link to the latest report that can be provided. What also came up was the concern around the recycling of tankers, and in particularly the ready for certification needs for safe for entry and safe for hot work. So this will be also considered in the final update. Also not listed here, but a question about going beyond, which is very much what this is, about going beyond regulation, a consideration for whether a ship owner is recycling at EU whitelist yards, even if not required by the regulations. So we are considering that also. Regarding our continued work, really there's the three elements that are covered here on the slide. The first is all about the ship recycling facility disclosure development. And for us, though there are risks around voluntary reporting, the SRTI, we remind everybody, is neither a standard nor a certification program nor a rating. And so it's important that there are key elements of the governance process around the further development of new disclosure criteria, which will include identifying who contributes, who should be consulted, and who should sign off on this. There were some issues raised during the earlier webinars, and we will take those points into account when we are developing this, as you saw from the timeline slide earlier covering the webinars during Q4 of this year. The next element is really about the circular economy. And it's clear that the role of the circular economy in ship recycling is still emerging. And there are many complexities due to the number of times a vessel changes ownership, which we all know very much. So tracking of equipment and components through the life of a vessel, through IHMs, for example, is one of the first steps towards bringing together the build to recycle processes in a ship's life cycle. The last part here is really data for financial stakeholders. As I mentioned earlier, the data must be useful and ship recycling seen as a material issue for investors and other financial stakeholders in their work and their assessments. There's certainly an increasing demand for disclosure and transparency, as well as increased use of non-CO2 metrics in sustainable finance. And we know and aware that several rating agencies already use the SRTI data, including CDP. This points to a greater potential for ship recycling data to be incorporated in risk analysis and decisions made by those financial stakeholders. Again, as per the timeline, you can see that in the coming months, we'll be adding more functionality to the SRTI data platform, including additional data being disclosed. And the additional functionality will help to make the data more transparent, accessible, and useful to financial stakeholders, shippers, and other interested parties. So this is a short snapshot of who we are, what we're about, and the current state of the work that we are undertaking. And with that, I'll hand back to Francis.
Andrew, thank you very much. That's a lot of information there that I hope we'll be able to sort of, you know, touch on now in the discussion from the perspectives of our three panelists, who I'd like to introduce now. Roger Strevens, VP of Global Sustainability at Wallenius Wilhelmsen, so representing the ship owner perspective with us. We have Jennifer Riley-James, Senior Ship Recycling Specialist, Fleet Services, Lloyd's Register, and Andreas Brachel, VP Head of Environmental Claims at Gard. And a moment to welcome Gard to SRTI. In Andreas, I think Gard is, well, I know Gard is the first P&I club to have joined SRTI. You joined in March, I understand. So really, really delighted also to have the insurance perspective represented in the discussions. Thank you all very much for joining. With what Andrew has just outlined there in mind, I wanted just sort of by way of you know, hearing quickly your sort of engagement with SRTI, sort of why and what, to really hear from you. You know, why do you think, you know, transparency is so critical in driving progress here, and is it nudging the needle fast enough? So perhaps Roger, if I could turn to you first.
Thank you, Francis, and good morning all. Thank you also to SRTI for hosting this event, which we're very pleased to be a part of. Transparency is perhaps the most important change factor in vessel recycling, because as Andrew and you alluded to in your earlier remarks, that regulation is progressing slowly in this area. But once you make known what the approach to recycling is, what the consequences of bad recycling are, well, then you put stakeholders of the industry, whether those are financial stakeholders or they're commercial stakeholders, you put them in a position to make informed decisions on who they work with in regard to recycling. It's the classic knowledge is power kind of situation. And I think that's particularly important these days when you consider that companies are expected to take responsibility not just for their own direct sustainability performance, but also for the sustainability of their supply chains. And so that means that if somewhere in your supply chain there is a company or an entity who are doing things which are not above board, well, that can have really serious implications in terms of stock price or your access to financial services, or your customers' willingness to continue doing business with you. So it's not just a nice to do. This is business critical.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with that. That is something I hope that we will come back to. This is absolutely business critical. This isn't about discretionary ethical behaviour here. So Roger, thanks for making that point, so well right up front. Jennifer, can I put that same question to you? From Lloyd's Register's perspective, how are you using the transparency, and is it moving fast enough?
Hi, yeah. So in terms of the transparency and how quickly we're seeing changes in the ship recycling industry, I think that certainly over the last 5 years, there's been a real step change that we've seen in the way ship owners and recycling facilities, as well as other parts of the value chain, are starting to engage in the ship recycling transparency piece. And I think there's a real kind of on the ground kind of engagement with really thinking about how standards can be improved and raised. And I think the transparency piece has come along later in this kind of 5-6 year window, where people have kind of suddenly thought, actually, we need to be open about what it is we're doing, because that will help us ultimately to, if they're a kind of a ship recycling facility, to kind of gain more business, and obviously from the ship owner's perspective, that kind of transparency around disclosing ship recycling policies kind of also helps them as part of the wider kind of corporate social responsibility piece as well. And obviously we're seeing in the media that ship owners are being held accountable with various kind of legal cases that have come to the forefront over the last several years, and obviously there's a few in particular at the moment that are quite high profile ones. And so I think bringing all of that together has really driven the need for transparency across the sector. So yeah, I think that what we're seeing, is great, and is kind of a great start, and it's kind of exciting to see the next steps and where it's going to go from here as this kind of ground up movement, responding to the kind of the top down policy driver in the first instance. But I think really we'll see the industry going beyond that.
Thanks, Jennifer. I think that point of the sort of the blend of the, as you said, the top-down policy driver, and then other factors, not least, media attention, lawsuits, and a myriad of different factors that are kind of behind the building momentum. So thank you for outlining those for us. Andreas, could I turn to you for your thoughts?
I think it's really about showing who we are. This is what we stand for. This is our policy. It all boils down to sustainability in general, and transparency on ship recycling is a part of that. And that means that other companies, both prospective clients as well as our competitors, they can see who we are, and we also see which other companies we want to cooperate with going forward. For us, it is also an opportunity to make informed decisions, as Roger mentioned, when we are involved in recycling ourselves, and in particular now, what was mentioned by Andrew as the next step of ship recycling facility disclosure. I think that will be very interesting for us, and would help us in our decisions when we need to make them.
Francis, could I make an additional point on the need for transparency? And it's that in the industry, there's a very wide range of approaches to recycling, from really the very, very awful, both in environmental and social terms, to I think what are very responsible approaches. And the companies who are taking a responsible approach, and that's certainly what our ambition has been for a long time now, that for us, transparency is what we can use to help level the playing field. And the reason that that's important is that it can cost us up to $2 million more to recycle a vessel responsibly than to take the cheap and nasty approach. And so, since the progress in regulation is extremely slow, we need another way to try and, like I mentioned, level the playing field, to draw the rest of the industry up to a more similar standard. And so transparency is a very powerful tool to do that. We need to drive this forward. You could call this enlightened self-interest, and that's fine with us. This, again, comes back to the same point. It's not just nice to do. This is business. This is business critical.
Thank you. I mean, enlightened self-interest is fine. That's it's interesting that sort of all of you have picked out this, and Andreas, you said it clearly. This idea of values, as a company, who we are, what we stand for, and how we're doing business. In a responsible way, environmentally, socially, but it's also, this is about risk management and risk mitigation and sort of sustainable business. And that figure you quote there, Roger, of $2 million more, that differential in cost between responsible and irresponsible recycling is a stark one, particularly in current sort of economic climate. And I think it sort of goes to this this sort of tension between that, what is seen as competitive advantage, those companies that are at the forefront, who are adopting directly or requiring of their business customers these highest standards from an environmental, from a human rights perspective, and thereby, or those companies that are operating by that become partners of choice. And what is pre-competitive? What is, Rogers, you said, the leveling of the playing field. This is pre-competitive standards that everybody needs to be reaching, and the competitive advantage then comes after that. It's trying to get that pre-competitive space up to levels that are meeting environmental, social, human rights standards that's so critical. So just to sort of dig into that a bit more, and feel free to kind of come back on each other's points and follow up and so on. But I just, again, if I could start maybe from the ship owner's perspective, Roger, can you give us a sense of how you're directly working with customers around using the SRTI data, a real sense of sort of, operationally, kind of how do the discussions work? What's the process, and how are the customers responding to it?
Yes, certainly. And I think this is a very interesting area. I mentioned a moment earlier about the need to manage the sustainability of your supply chain. It's something that our customers have really been paying increased attention to, and it seems like every other day there's a new request or a new kind of reporting initiative. But it's seldom to never that those sustainability inquiries have any addressed vessel recycling. And I think that that's simply because most of our customer base are just not aware of this as an issue. Nobody really stops to think, well, what happens to these vessels when they reach the end of their service lives? And so we start there. We explain what that process is and how it can go, be conducted in a very responsible way or in a truly horrific way. And we talk about our approach and we link it to them. We explain that if you allow your carriers to recycle in a very poor standard, well then that can become consequential for you. That can have a business impact. And I think there are plenty of recent examples where very large listed companies, IT companies, companies from any sector have been really suffer the consequences of dealing with having suppliers who don't handle sustainability well. And so we make that connection, and then what we try to do next is to explain that for them to protect themselves, transparency is their friend. If they know, well, then they can make the informed decisions that Andreas mentioned earlier. And they should, I mean, what we would encourage them to do is to demand transparency as a minimum requirement for participating in a tender. And that's, to what you were saying about raising the floor, just should be a standard basic minimum. It's not to specify a particular approach. And I think that's an interesting issue by itself. Within SRTI, there are 13 now carriers. We don't all have the same approach to recycling. And for us, that's okay. What we do agree on is that the worst of the worst is entirely unacceptable and has to stop. We will work to end that. And so anyway, back to the customers, is that we explain that if you demand transparency, that's not going to reduce your choice of carrier, because nobody from the carrier side is going to say, you know what, we don't want your business, we want to stick with our cheap and nasty recycling. That's not something that happens. And equally, it doesn't drive cost, because if you have got companies who are already taking a responsible approach, you can't turn around to a customer and say, well, you've got to pay us extra to be decent corporate citizens. That also just doesn't happen. So it's very much in the interest of cargo owners to demand transparency.
Can I, if I just chip in there? I think what Roger had said earlier about knowledge being power, I think that's a really kind of key point. And I think if you go back, 30, 40 years maybe, there's always been this historical disengagement around ship recycling, and there's always been this not in my backyard kind of motto around it. If you can't see it, it's not happening, it's not my problem. But I think what we're seeing now, as we're getting more knowledge circulated around society and through the value chain, through the transparency initiative like we're talking about here, and through raising awareness, what's going on. And once you know what's going on, it's very difficult to turn a blind eye to it. And it works in the other way. So not just in a negative way of going, oh, that's a really bad practice. But once you know somebody is doing something that is going beyond what the historical norm was, let's say, then that starts to make people think and go, well, if they're doing that, what are other people doing? And that's how the kind of the change is driven. And that's what's really key here, where we've got this kind of first tranche of signatories to the SRTI that are kind of stepping up and going, look, hold my hands up, this is what we're doing, this is what we think is right, and learning and growing and trying to raise the floor, as the term's been used here a few times now, to continue to improve and increase the engagement of the whole of society, essentially.
That sort of, the widening of the engagement of different stakeholders, including NGOs and civil society, affected groups, affected communities, and the workers themselves, their voices as part of this debate as well, incredibly important. Could I just remind participants to send your questions via the Q&A box? There's a few coming in through chat, and it's just hard for us to look at both. So if you could do them through the Q&A box, that will be great, and I can keep an eye on those. Just sort of picking up then, Jen, on what you said there, can you, so, having looked at sort of the customers, and that point of SRTI's got, 13 different ship owners represented, different, everybody's got slightly different approaches, but if we've got a consistency of disclosure of data, transparency around that, it starts to be easier to compare like for like. Can you just give us a sense sort of what progress you're seeing at the yard level?
Yeah, so in terms of the ship recycling facilities, Lloyd's Register have, so we've got a global reach in terms of where we can work, and we've primarily worked at the moment in Turkey and South Asia. And in South Asia, in India, we've worked with a handful of yards who've shown this real commitment to change and sustainability and improving their practices from the ground up. And this has really kind of been driven largely by the ship recycling facility owners there, because they've seen the value of this change. And so, and they can see that they're going to have ultimately a return on their investment. And certainly the yards that we're seeing this change in, that's because there's been this there's almost like a generational shift. So recycling facilities that have been held within families for many years are now coming into the management, shall we say, of the next generation, and they can kind of really see the value in investment and change. And so we've seen, you know, that recycling facilities are starting to you know, put down hard standing and invest in drainage systems, really looking at the requirements that have been set out by the legislation, so both Hong Kong Convention and the EU Ship Recycling Regulation, and looking at how they can invest and upgrade their facilities to raise the standard and improve health, safety and environmental practices. But it's not just around the infrastructure where we're seeing change and progress, but there's a lot of innovation going on. So traditionally, you know, bleaching has been seen as, well, and still sometimes is in the poorer yards, you know, not a good practice. But there's been a lot of thinking outside the box in the yards that we've been working very closely with over the last 5 or 6 years, and there's new technologies and methodologies which we haven't seen before, and are kind of being proven to help massively reduce, you know, like paint chip scattering and kind of leakage of pollutants when ships are kind of cut from bulkhead to bulkhead and open pipe work is sealed up again. So they've really put in kind of quite a lot of time and thought to how to improve their standards, and that level of investment is great. And I think the other thing that we're seeing is that the recycling facilities are now starting to become aware that their workforce is also a valuable asset. So it's not just about the infrastructure investment, but it's also about the training and the engagement of the labourers in the yards to make sure that actually the outputs of the ship recycling facilities meet the right health, safety and sustainability criteria, because at the end of the day, if the workers aren't able to operate in a safe manner, then the whole process kind of falls apart. But there's obviously been a lot of on the ground training and investment to bring the kind of the standards up. And I think from what we've seen, we really have to be quite open-minded, certainly in South Asia, about what sustainable ship recycling could look like, because I think we're never going to move the recycling off the beach, but we have to be thinking about, well, how is it that they are changing their practices, and are these changes actually enough to meet the minimum standards or go beyond the minimum standards set by the top-down policy. And certainly for the handful of yards that we see this change and drive, we certainly think that, you know, these yards are looking like really good sustainable ship recycling yards, despite still being on a beach. But obviously, you know, there needs to be ongoing assessment and review and monitoring of the situation to make sure that the changes put in place and the improvements are sustainable in the long term and have, you know, long-term impacts on the industry. And obviously that's where we kind of come in with certainly the certification that we provide to ship recycling facilities, to make sure that there is this long-term monitoring and feedback to say, well, actually, you know, things have slipped a little bit in area X, Y, or Z. This is what you need to be doing. We need to be aware of it to bring it back up to standard. And that's kind of the role that certainly we at LR and other ROs, classification societies, take to help that process along. But it's all driven by this ground up change and engagement.
Well, thanks.
Without that, it doesn't work.
Yeah, no, absolutely critical. And I'm also, you know, so pleased that you mentioned the workers in there, because, you know, I think so often the conversation is around metrics and standards and numbers and so on. And actually, you know, there is at the core of all of this the question of decent work for people working in ship recycling facilities and human dignity. And I think that you know, that needs to be a really important part of the conversation as well. This is, you know, this is including looking at the social risks, leveling up the S in the ESG, and remembering that this is also about you know, about decent work, decent wages, decent conditions, access to healthcare, etc. So thank you for putting that on the table as well. Andreas, if I could just, we've got questions coming thick and fast. So Andreas, can I just turn to you sort of for very quick reflections from an insurance point of view? Vessel maintenance sort of throughout the ship life cycle. It was mentioned earlier, the importance now at the design stage of how a ship's going to be recycled at the end. IHMs, the inventory of hazardous materials and so on. Can you just give us, from a Gard perspective, sort of reflections on that?
Well, our interest in recycling is twofold. First, by being an insurer of vessels from the very cradle when they are built in the yards to when they are sold to cash buyers for recycling. And we insure these vessels throughout that time. Sometimes also the owner takes it to the recycling, and then we actually insure it all the way to the yard. And what's important for us is that the owner does not engage in any unlawful trade, which illegal scrapping would be. What the positive news is here, like Jennifer mentioned, is that many yards now invest in getting they're improving their standards, both on the social aspects with the workers as well as the environmental aspects. And we, as users of their facilities, we need to make sure that those investments are worthwhile by choosing the ones who have made a commitment into sustainable recycling. As I just touched upon, we are also involved in ship recycling when it comes to wrecks. We cover wreck removal, and we will then step into the shoes of the ship owner and arrange for the scrapping of those or recycling of those wrecks. And then we need to find which yards are available to us. And then Jennifer's work with certification of these facilities are very important for us in order for us to be able to find yards that may tick all the boxes from both environmental, social, and governance aspects. Then you mentioned maintenance, and that is possibly a concern as these recycling procedures have become more expensive due to increased sustainability. And instead of getting money back from your vessel you sell to a cash buyer, in some cases you actually have to pay money to get rid of it. And our concern is that some ship owners may not necessarily invest sufficiently in maintenance of their vessels, which again may cause a hazard. They may be laid up, not maintained, and may possibly sink. And we've seen a couple of examples where that could be the case. And of course, as an insurer, it's very important for us to pick up on those cases through our risk assessment team, our loss prevention team, to find which vessels which are in danger of sinking, mainly due to poor maintenance at the end of their lives. And of course, the classification societies has a very important role in this.
That's really useful to get that perspective in there, Andreas. Thank you. I think that you know, and the sort of the importance of the classification and the insurance perspectives of it really, you know, that really resonates. I'm going to go. Does anybody want to? Roger or Jenna want to come back on any of that, and then I'm going to go to the questions in the box.
I think if I can make one additional point about transparency, is that now that there is a platform exists for disclosing all of the relevant information on vessel recycling, I think that creates an onus on the industry stakeholders to do something with the information that it contains. It's not sufficient that just shows the information and things will get better. There's also an obligation on all of the different stakeholders to use that, and to use the fact that there is now a platform to compel other shipping companies to disclose their approaches. So, you know, there are two aspects to this. In other words, I think what it means is that progress can be driven by really, using transparency as the lever. Progress can be driven by nearly any stakeholder in this industry.
I think that point that you know, disclosure in and of itself isn't going to be enough to drive progress. It's one tool in the box. It's a critical one, but as that point that it needs to be used by everybody, to be pushing from all those different angles to get the momentum building, I think is a really critical one, Roger. I just wanted to, some of the questions, and thank you to the panelists who've been answering as we've gone along, but some of them I think are worth just also sort of bringing into the discussion. There's a question around, it's back to the workers. How do you bring the benefits of this SRTI initiative to a sustainable, safe and hazard-free environment for the poor workers, especially in South Asian ship recycling facilities? So reflections, I mean, again, maybe sort of, you know, Roger, from a ship owner's perspective, this, you know, we understand about the reputational risks, you know, this is better business, but how does it translate to those workers on the ground?
Well, I think that the days of irresponsible recycling are numbered. And we're seeing that from the response that Jen talked about from leading recycling facilities across India and in Pakistan, Bangladesh, actually all over the world, that they see that they see the writing on the wall is that cheap and nasty is not a sustainable, a long-term approach for business. And that then I think plays to the interests of the workers in facilities which are currently below par, that the change is being driven by transparency, increased interest, concern for this, for the topic. And I just from you know, the owners of facilities are realizing that this is a disruptive effect in their business, and that, you know, their future can't necessarily continue to look like their past.
Mm-hmm. There's a link, direct link from that to the next question from Alistair Pyle, which is, you know, talked about due diligence and the need for monitoring for compliance. What we haven't talked about is the role of remedy, and what role disclosure and transparency plays in the whole process of proper remedy for human rights and environmental abuses. So assuming that abuses are still taking place, where do you see transparency and more disclosure of data leading to accountability for abuses and remedy for any of those violations? Jen, Andreas, maybe I could get your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Roger, come in. I'm just keeping an eye on the clock as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's around how the data is used. So, okay, and I think that's what Roger's just mentioned. You know, we can we as an industry can disclose data. Obviously ship owners are doing that. Hopefully the next stage will be for ship recycling facilities to start being able to be drawn into that process as well, which Andrew mentioned right at the beginning. And so I think once the data is available and then wider society starts to use that data appropriately to work out, you know, the good from the bad and understand what is happening, I think that will then start to drive, you'll be able to use that to drive kind of fair and proper remedies for human rights abuses, environmental abuses. But I don't think there's not going to be a direct impact on the workers on the ground. It's not a ship owner discloses or a ship recycling facility discloses and everything gets better for the on the ground workers. It's not that black and white. We don't live in that simplistic a society, unfortunately, or greatly, because it makes life more interesting that way. But you know, it's a start and it's a building block in the road to improving this industry and moving away, like I said previously, from this historical disengagement to this greater societal awareness and responsibility. And it's not just about the ship owner responsibility or the insurer's responsibility. It's about the wider public engagement ultimately in understanding the ship recycling process and the value chain, and going, well, my stuff comes from supplier X and we know that they have, you know, they've disclosed about their ship recycling policies, and it's that kind of building on the data and the value of the data, and that whole knowledge is power. So yeah, it's not a direct implication, but ultimately it's the start of worker improvement.
Right.
Yeah, I agree, Jen. Sorry, Andreas.
Roger, please.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Roger.
I agree that the transparency doesn't necessarily give a direct, immediate benefit, but I think to workers. But I think it does in the slightly longer run, because if you make transparency the norm in the business, then the demand, if you make it the norm, then I think what you would find is that the performance even at the lowest end of the business will increase, will rise. And the reason for that is so straightforward, is that companies do not want to disclose that they do awful things. Yeah. And it's not that complicated these days to see whether the information that's being disclosed is actually accurate or not. There are so many people with so many phones who can very quickly establish whether the information that's on how a vessel has been recycled is accurate or not. And if nobody wants to disclose that they do awful things, well then, you know, the number of awful things that happen will begin to decrease over time. And that's, I think, good for workers.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Andreas?
I think what's important here is that different stakeholders and like ship owners, and Gard is owned by leading ship owners in the world in various segments of the market. And we are told by our owners, our members, that they want a level playing field. They want to be, they want to do the right thing in their operation, and they want to be seen as doing the right thing. That has a cost. And by being transparent about that, they want everyone else to see it, and so that others can compare their operation with their competition. So if we then raise the bar as we have done, or raise the floor as has been said now, we also even the playing field. Those investments will then be necessary to do for everyone.
And that point, Andreas, that, you know, necessary for everyone, there's a question come in, what about consistency for yards to getting ships for recycling from owners who believe in such responsibilities? So that, you know, that sort of the perspective of the ship recycling facilities, getting the right ship, you know, ship owners using their yards. Any thoughts, any quick thoughts there on sort of the other side of the equation, as it were?
So was that for me?
Andreas, yeah, for sure. Jen and Roger, jump in if you want to. But yes, that sort of the ship recycling facility perspective on this.
I think they want to be shown as doing business with the leaders in the market as well. If Roger and other leading ship owners around the world are using their facilities, then that is obviously good for their business.
I think a point that I wanted to add is raising a question posted in the Q&A, which I thought was interesting, and that was, would it be an idea for SRTI to include disclosure from signatories who are not carriers on how they use this data? And as a general principle, transparency should be 360-degree, and so it should be something that's appealing to do, not that you feel that you're kind of, your arm is being twisted behind your back and you reluctantly do this. It should be something which creates business value for you, and we would take that approach. This is something which it makes business sense to do. So yeah, I think that's an interesting area for SRTI to develop into in the future. Perhaps we need a few to build our base of signatories a bit further before we get to that point, but it would be a good idea to pursue.
Getting that voice, firmly around the table.
To demonstrate that this is, to what we were discussing earlier, is that this is not just about data that's disclosed for the sake of it. Right. This data has a really business consequential material purpose.
And that without the, if transparency becomes the norm, that's when accountability is strengthened, and all parts of the equation are held accountable for their commitments. And that's back to that remedy question, where companies are failing to uphold those commitments and abuses, environmental or human rights are arising because of that, then there can be a greater level of accountability. Just to draw everybody's attention, there are a lot of the questions, of which there have been some excellent ones, have been answered in the Q&A box. So just take a flick through those as well. We haven't got time to come to all of them. I'm going to turn very shortly back to Andrew, but I just wanted to thank the panelists very much indeed for sharing your wisdom and your insights. It's really the tip of the iceberg, but this I think this idea of increasing disclosure and transparency by the ship owners and the ship recycling facilities, the role that SRTI is playing in sort of progressively raising the bar there and building momentum to the point that this becomes mainstream practice. And that there are the industry norms and regulatory frameworks to sustain that momentum. This is a really important part in that process. And you've very clearly highlighted that sort of every stage of the ship life cycle influences what happens at recycling stage, and therefore the transparency, the reporting, right from sort of design onwards, a well-maintained IHM and so on. And that being sort of part of this drive for the circular economy that is increasing exponentially is crucial too. There's some useful. The question then is sort of that the SRTI platform needs to have useful, accurate, and up-to-date data. That's critical, and Roger's point, data on its own that sits there is little use to man nor beast. We need that data to be used, and so that's also a call to the NGOs and other stakeholders to be saying, use that data. This isn't only to sort of sit with the ship owners and the ship recycling facilities and the banks. This is data to be used. So thank you so much. I'm going to turn back to Andrew to conclude. Thank you very much to all three of you.
Great. Thank you, Frances, and thank you for chairing and facilitating the panel, and thank you to our panelists, Roger, Jen, and Andreas, for contributing, answering all the questions as possible during the limited time. As mentioned, we are going to share the recording with you all after this event, and we will populate answers to those questions that we didn't manage to cover during the session. So thank you all very much for taking the time to join, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening your time. Much of the discussion for me was very rewarding, including the Q&As, and really matched what we're trying to achieve, the objectives of increasing transparency, increasing disclosure and accountability, and creating that level playing field. So this matches what we're focused on, and really helps to contribute to the further development and the work ahead for us in the Secretariat together with our signatories. Useful data is key, and we are also working with other rating agencies, and ship recycling is not only coming up in specific shipping industry rating enterprises, but also generally from an investor, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and so on. So picking up on that last point, that it's used and what do they use it for, we will also be taking that discussion with those as we develop further. Again, thank you very much for joining, conscious of time, and we will share this recording afterwards. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.